Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. I want to start this video by quickly mentioning that you're probably going to hear some static in the background as I do the recording today. It is raining pretty heavily here. It has been raining pretty heavily all day. I've been waiting for an opportunity to jump in and actually do this video, but it just hasn't presented itself and it looks like the weather's going to get worse, not better. So I figured I should quickly do my recording before that happens. I wanted to do the video today anyway because there's a game that I really want to talk about called King's Bounty 2, which is just released and I really want to talk about it. So I apologize for the static sound in the background and hopefully you can hear me clearly anyway. But yes, King's Bounty 2. This is a game that has just released on just about everything. It's available on PlayStation and Xbox and PC and Switch. It's the Switch version that I want to talk about today because for me personally it's the most interesting. I will say up front that all the footage that you are seeing on the screen has been captured from the Switch version and the game does look better on PlayStation, Xbox and PC. So if graphical fidelity is what you're after, you're better off going with one of those platforms. For me though, I quite like the convenience of the Switch. It is my preferred console wherever possible. As long as the game runs enough on it, I'm quite happy to accept a drop in graphical fidelity. And King's Bounty 2 on top of that suits the handheld format. Because it is a fairly slow-paced game, I can have my TV on watching a movie or whatever at the same time. I like to multitask sometimes with my entertainment so that I can get a lot more in, and when I'm doing that, obviously playing a slow-paced game like King's Bounty is preferable to playing an action game where I need to focus entirely on the Switch. So I was more than willing to play King's Bounty on the Switch, and I'm quite glad that we got it because we don't get that many Western RPGs on the Switch. When you think about it, we have the excellent port of The Witcher 3, which I don't think anybody thought was possible, but the developers really pulled that off and it works. It's a very good port of a very good game. There's also Kingdoms of Amalur, which is another very good game that was ported more than competently to the Switch. But beyond that, you've got to go back to the really early games of the Western RPG genre, the likes of Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Neverwinter Nights. Those were released on the Switch as part of console re-releases, but they are older games. They're very much worth playing, and I love having them on that console. But when it comes to kind of modern Western RPGs, I don't have that many to choose from on the Switch. So for that reason as well, I was quite keen on seeing how King's Bounty 2 turned out on the console. So you can check out my full thoughts on the game on digitallydownloaded.net, but to talk about what I really enjoyed about King's Bounty 2, it is a B-grade Western RPG, and we'll talk about B-grade Western RPGs shortly, but it has the full scope of any other game in the genre. It has this huge open world to explore. It has a lot of different decisions that you can make, a lot of different factions that you can join based on your decisions, and as you go down the path of those factions, the ideal party that you have to take into combat will change. So, for example, if you go down one route and complete a lot of missions for one faction, then your ideal party will be a bunch of skeletons, zombies, and other undead things. If you go down another path, you end up with a party of dwarves. Another path will give you an army of knights in shining armor and archers and that kind of stuff. So you do have, I think there's four. Yeah, there's four different factions, and each faction has particular strengths and weaknesses, and the ideal faction for you will depend largely on how you go about the story missions within the game. So you do have a lot of choice. And while I'm not a big fan of open world games generally, when it comes to the Western RPG, I kind of am, because for the fantasy vibe that these games generally gun for, having that freedom to explore the world and just have your own quests it's a big deal. And I think King's Bounty 2 has done a good job of that. There is a good sense of scope there, even putting aside the limitations of the Switch hardware and its graphical fidelity issues. The game really does have a wide open scope. It's got a beautiful vision of a very kind of traditional fantasy world, and we don't see that many games that do that anymore. Most RPGs even try to innovate or whatever, and there aren't that many that just kind of gun for that classic Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Rings, Heroes of Might and Magic vibe. So I really enjoyed that about King's Bounty. It's a very traditional RPG at heart. It definitely has its roots in kind of a nostalgia and retro approach to these games, and that was something that really appealed to me as somebody who's been playing Western RPGs for as long as they've been around. Grew up playing SSI, Dungeons and Dragons games from the DOS systems, and I've never lost my love of the genre. King's Bounty 2 really taps into that and gives me that kind of experience on my Switch. It's also one of the really rare B-grade Western RPGs we have on the Switch. The couple of Western RPGs that we do have on Switch, they all tend to be the kind of AAA blockbuster ones, the Skyrims or The Witcher 3 or Kingdoms of Amalur. And there's a certain difference in experience to B-grade Western RPGs, which is really appealing, and we don't get that on the Switch. So I'm talking about games like Risen back on the PlayStation 3 and 4, or the Spiders games like Greedfall, which recently got a PlayStation 5 re-release. Those kinds of games, they have a quality about them which is distinct from what the blockbuster developers do with the genre. And it is an appealing difference. The core of it, I think, is just the creative freedom that it has. Because these games don't have the need to appeal to the mass market, they can really indulge being games for fans of the genre, and that's really where they target. So there is a certain level of inaccessibility to them, and certainly King's Bounty 2 is like that. If you go off on the wrong path, despite the world being open, you're going to run into some incredibly difficult monsters and get yourself slaughtered. And it is quite possible to get yourself very lost in the world, and the mapping system, the journal system is all a bit obscure. I've seen from the couple of reviews that I've already read of the game that the people who are maybe more casual fans of RPGs get a little bit lost in it all because it's just not as directed as the bigger budget Western RPGs. And it didn't need to be, because the developers knew the people that were going to be playing it were existing fans of the genre, and they were targeting people more like me who would just intuitively know how to go about playing these games. So because the developers can rely on its player base being existing fans of the genre, that does liberate them in a sense to be a bit creative about what they do with it in terms of giving players systems and narratives that are specifically designed around the RPG tropes. So it feels like you're playing a tabletop RPG with King's Bounty 2. Yes, the voice acting is pretty terrible, but then if you've actually ever played a tabletop RPG, you're not looking at Shakespearean quality performances, and there's a certain aesthetic appeal to that. People who play enough tabletop RPGs and are deep enough involved in the RPG genre, there's a certain appreciation for the fun value of bad voice acting, I think, and that's gone back way back when to the genesis of the genre. I remember watching a video called what was it called? Summoner. It was a tie-in video to Summoner Geeks, I think it was, and it was just a little promotional video that they created of the characters from Summoner playing an RPG, and they were all having fun about how bad the voice acting was and the kind of the commands that the characters were throwing out there, and it went viral at the time. This was before the internet was really a huge thing, so it was pretty impressive that it went viral, and it was a very popular little video, and it really tapped into that as well. Summoner itself ended up being a pretty B-tier RPG itself. So there is that aesthetic about the games like King's Bounty 2, which the bigger budget RPGs sheen off because they're trying to appeal to people who aren't necessarily existing fans of RPGs. King's Bounty 2 just completely indulges it. Another example is the combat system itself. There is a tutorial system to basically explain how to play, but to understand King's Bounty 2, you've got to really have played Heroes of Might and Magic games, because that's really where it taps into the way that the hero interacts with the battlefield. For example, you'll be getting all this equipment for your character, and you won't understand what any of it means because the character doesn't actually participate in battle, but that equipment powers up their units on the battlefield, just like it did in Heroes of Might and Magic. And the way that the units in Heroes of Might and Magic move around is very similar to the way that they do in King's Bounty. So even though they're separate properties, they do have that relationship, and because we haven't had a Heroes of Might and Magic game for quite some time, the fact that King's Bounty 2 kind of assumes that you've played those games just goes to show you the audience that this game is really targeting at. So it is very inaccessible for new players, and I would not recommend that you pick up King's Bounty if you haven't played a lot of RPGs. But if you have, I think the qualities are there that this will be an appealing little game. I don't think it's going to be a Game of the Year thing by any means for a lot of people, even people who are hardcore fans of the genre like I am. It will be forgotten quickly enough, but while it lasts, it's a lot of fun, and it does last for quite a while because it is so huge and there's so many things to do in it. So yeah, that's my top line thoughts about the game. Once again, check out my review on digitallydownloaded.net. Do let me know your own thoughts in the comments. If you're a fan of B-grade RPGs, let me know how this one stands in the genre for you. Otherwise, please do mash that like and subscribe button if you enjoy my work. That way you'll catch the videos as I upload them. And if you do enjoy my work, please do consider backing me on Patreon. You can do so for just $1 a month. And in addition to supporting what we do on this YouTube channel and also all the written stuff we do at digitallydownloaded.net, you do get a monthly magazine over there, which is 48 pages of pretty in-depth essays and features on everything to do with Japanese games and culture, not just the video games, but also the history, the books, the literature, the films, the art. We cover it all, and we use that magazine as a way of introducing or giving more context, I guess, to the Japanese games that people like to play. So that is pretty good value for just $1 a month, and you'll be directly supporting what we do here. Alright, that's enough for this video. Thank you as always for tuning in. We will see you next time.